Hi, everyone. That was sort of a really natural, nice silence falling. Good job. Dramatic moment there. I'm Naomi Clark, and I'm the chair of the NYU Game Center. And I'm happy to welcome you to yet another NYU Game Center lecture series. Brought to you by Empire State Development, Take-Two Interactive, our sponsors who, among others, help make this series possible. And our guest tonight, Evan Narcisse. With too many credits for me to easily fit into a bio. But, I'll try to go roughly in chronological order. Brooklyn native. Born a few miles south of here at Maimonides General Hospital.
Wow. I literally just told you that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no. But your family's here. I wanted to be like, yeah, Maimonides.
Yeah.
And NYU alum.
Yes, yeah.
Adjunct professor for a while for the NYU Game Center.
That's right.
Yeah. And also a games critic. A games journalist.
No applause for that. Okay, keep going.
Written for publications like The Atlantic on a lot of different things, literature, games, comics, history, and then writing a bunch of comics, well known for that, Black Panther. Yeah. Writing for a bunch of games, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and many other games we'll talk about. And did I miss anything? Television?
Yeah, I was story producer on a documentary called Milestone Generations about Milestone Media, a black-owned comics company from the 1990s. That was a deeply personal. Thank you. Nice. Clap it up. I see you. Yeah. I see you. Clap it up for Milestone.
How did I know that you did? How did I not know you did a Milestone documentary? I love Twin McDuffie.
Yes. And what else? TV. Genlock. And Daniel Spellbound on Netflix. I think that's everything for TV.
Yeah.
For now.
So a man of many media.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now, welcome back to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Currently based in Austin, but back home.
Yes.
So let's give one more big round of welcome back home applause for Evan. Thank you. So we're here tonight to talk about your life and times, your work, your perspective on the industry. Yeah, no, you've earned it. You've been around this place for a while.
Yeah. Should I start looking at burial plots? I don't know. Anyway.
But I want to start, how did you get started as a writer? What led you? Because I feel like that's where you kind of began.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I wanted to write from a very, very early age. Writing was the first thing I got, really positive feedback in terms of, a pedagogical dynamic, right? Teachers was like, hey, you can write. Like many teenagers, I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. Probably right until right before college, right? So, I have an analytical brain. So my mom always said, you should be a lawyer. So it was poli-sci at NYU. And I remember I took my first constitutional law class. I was like, these words are all in English, but I don't know what they're trying to say. So I bounced off. It's funny because I fulfilled my requirements for political science really early, probably by sophomore year I was done. And, one of the other things that happened in college was I really kind of was able to pursue, for lack of a better term, my academic curiosity about how blackness is lived in a scholarly setting, right? I didn't get that in high school. I went to a primarily white, all-Catholic boys high school in Long Island. You can look it up, but whatever. I'm not shouting them out. I felt very much exoticized in that environment. And in college, I didn't, right? I felt like, okay, there's more of a cohort here. There are peers. And, I got to experience, what I would now call, lots of different modalities of blackness. And then had the academic resources to kind of, pursue that stuff. So, that really kind of coalesced when I took a class called Minorities in Media, taught by Professor David Dent, who I think might still be teaching at NYU. Yeah, that's the homie. I mean, mentor. He's not even my homie. Respect. Yeah, he was like, you should get into the journalism program. And I did. And from there, I was like, okay, I think this is what I wanted to do. You know, my entree into actual gainfully employed professional journalism was as a fact checker at Teen People magazine. And, you know, I say that we worked through the last glory days of magazine journalism because they're long since gone. But, you know, I was a fact checker, which means I wasn't writing, but like the magazine launched as a very gender neutral kind of enterprise, right? Where it was like, it wasn't like the teeny bopper, boy crazy, like J14 and those magazines. It was like more like speaking to people across the spectrum, right? So I was like, hey, video games and comic books are youth culture and we should be covering them, and I'm the guy who should be covering them. One of my editors gave me a shot, and from there, like, I started to, you know, get bylines, you know, make a reputation, and I started freelancing, writing about video games and pop culture there. So that's kind of where it all started.
You were an editor for a while too, right?
Yeah, I was, you know, at different websites, I was like an editor or staff writer. Like, I've pretty much always been in the trenches as a writer. Like, I found like that's where I like to be. Like, you know, if this doesn't sound too precious, like sentence craft is like my thing. Like, I like, you know, but also as an editor, you help shape that, right? Like, you know, I like, you know, wrestling with the words and figuring out the right ones and, you know, the right ideas and sequencing and all that stuff. So, yeah, like it's writing for me, unfortunately, like for the rest of my life.
Well, and to the benefit of the rest of us. And when do you feel like you got to take those experiences and thoughts that you were having in high school and college and actually start and writing about blackness, for instance?
Wow. You know, it's funny because my journalism career has been like a very kind of like multivalent one. So like there was a magazine called Honey in the early 2000s that was like in competitive to
This
Essence.
one on the screen here. This guy Lauryn Hill and Beyonce.
Yeah. I'm just laughing at the person who said that and the way they said it. Yes. So that was like one of the first places I really got to like spread my wings as a critic, and you know, I was the book editor for a while. That's why you asked if I was being an editor, if I was an editor. Yeah. So you know, I mostly figured out what books we would review and authors we would interview. Sometimes I got assigned those titles to cover, but you know, I had pretty free reign, and you know. Book publishing, like lots of other mainstream media, is predominantly white. And in that period of time, there was, you know, one of these cycles where, you know, being black is cool. Like, there's definitely cycles. I mean, for some of us, it's always that, but for some of y'all, it's not.
Wait, can I just, is there a period of years, like which years in the 90s were when it wasn't cool?
Yeah, so, you know, you're asking me to mark particular years, and you're being semi-sarcastic, but it's true.
No, I'm not. I think it's like 1994 to 1997.
I think, yeah, that was like one mini cycle. It kind of went back. Like, you know, what's funny, like this era, like when Lauren was becoming a superstar and Beyonce was, I think, just going out on her own.
Yeah, actually, that was big years for Lauren. I meant to say 1991 to 1994, the grunge period.
Yeah. Look, I'm a hip hop baby, and hip hop has always done its own thing.
It's true.
And sometimes those cycles are invisible to people in the mainstream. You know, one thing I've been big on as I've gotten older, especially doing the work that I do, is like, we have to acknowledge that there are different kinds of cultural literacies, right? And one of the things that I've experienced, and like lots of other people, marginalized people experience, is like, you can be multilingual in terms of cultural literacies. You can speak your own kind of language, and I mean that metaphorically, and you can also speak the mainstream language, right? Code switching is a phenomenon we're probably all familiar with now, but like the reverse is very often not true. So, you know, like I think about my brain is being shaped very much by jazz and hip hop and black art movements, and like sometimes you talk about those things which are like, you know, as normal as oxygen for me, and people are like, "Oh, I've never heard of Octavia Butler." I'm like, "You what?"
Yeah,
and,
it's
like you try not to judge there, but it's like somebody who's like deeply important in terms of like a creator on the American cultural landscape, like in my opinion, and like there are whole swaths of the population who don't know who she is or why she matters. And part of that's why I did the work I did as a critic and a journalist, and why I'm trying to do what I do now.
Makes
Did
sense.
that at all answer the question?
Yeah, no, definitely,
Okay.
Absolutely. And so you were doing more and more writing about games here and there.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And then at some point, maybe it was like 2000, sometime in the 2000s, you landed at Kotaku.
That's right. Yeah, it was 2011. I want to say it was October 3rd. 2011 was my first date. And yeah, the thing that Kotaku afforded me, was that complete freedom, right? Like to fall on my face, which I did sometimes, but also like to really find my voice and hone my craft. And, the thing about video game journalism is there's always this tenuous balancing act between like the consumerist product evangelism, like that the companies want you to be doing, and then there's the actual critique of the work as a text, right? And when I was freelancing, even though some of it was for pretty decent outlets, you get looked on as differently, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, can you place this story? And you're stock with these companies who are your only entryway to engage with the works that you want to be writing about. So your stock waxes and wanes, right? It rises and falls. Being at a place like Kotaku is like, oh, okay, I guess he's regularly going to be able to put stuff out now, and we can treat him like a real person. And that was like arriving in a certain way. So, but like it was a really good fit for me because I just wanted to be able to engage my curiosity without like worrying about like a 300-word blurb in a magazine somewhere that's not going to be able to fit everything I wanted to say. What image did you put up on there now? Oh yeah.
So while we're talking about it, so I feel like you really made your name at Kotaku writing about the Black experience in games, Black developers making games that really foregrounded Blackness, like Assassin's Creed Liberation,
Yeah.
Far Cry, right? I think or not Far Cry. What's the one where you're freeing this Freedom Cry?
Yes,
Thank you,
yeah.
Austin Walker, the guy who knows about games over there. Yeah, and that I think really put you on the map for a lot of people.
Yeah, like, look, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm full of myself, but I think I was a pretty good game critic, right? Like, I have reviews that I poured a lot of heart and soul into. Like, we talk about like games being a form of media where the player is asked to give attention and their time. And I think it's like a crucial part of engaging with video games is to talk about the personal. Again, like, the new games journalism thing goes all the way back to Kieran Gillen, like in the early aughts. But like, I think, again, this cycle keeps coming up because there is that core tension at the heart of video games as a form of media, right? Like, it's technology, it's product, it's art, it has all these different things going on. So like, if you're not talking about how it hits you personally and where it doesn't, for me, obviously, with the overwhelming whiteness of, the video game industry, like, yeah, a lot of my pieces came from the place of like, okay, but here's what we could be doing. Here's what we're missing out on. Like for me, the central operating question now that I'm on the developer side of things is like, video games could be like jazz. They could be like hip hop. They're multidisciplinary. There's people with different skills coming together, right? Like if you think about, a jazz quartet, right? There's like a horn player out in front, a rhythm section supporting him. You could definitely make the analogs that like sound design and art and level design and all this other stuff, like there are different instruments, right? So like, how do we get them all to play together? And I feel like one of the things that, increasingly I'm trying to prioritize is like, how do we find and create space for Blackness in this form, right? Like there's a Black film canon, a Black literary canon, a Black TV canon, right? Games doesn't have that yet, like in my opinion. Like, and if you were to codify such a canon, you then have to ask the questions like, okay, let's say this game was quote unquote part of the black canon. How many black people actually worked on it? And those numbers are not good at all.
Do you feel like we have anything like that at the smaller scale? Like we have like notable black artists.
Yeah,
in
for
games,
sure, for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Like like Valerie Nelson.
Sure.
Like I love that kid. I just want to protect him at all costs. And I'm calling him a kid. That's not necessarily fair, but there's a significant gap between our ages. And but like I think and I worked on indie games. I worked on a game called That's Home that was expressly designed to speak about like redlining. And I'm making you jump around your slideshow, aren't you?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I should be letting you drive this more.
No.
You asked me here. That's what you get.
There it is.
But like Dot's Home is a game about housing justice, which does not sound appetizing at its up front, but like it's really about how like one family through multiple generations has experienced like the policies and prejudices that stop them from being able to live where they want to live. And how do you create a home when you're somebody that you're part of a social strata that has been programmatically pushed to the margins, Like there are laws and policies that say you can't buy, you can't own, you can't live here. We're going to put you in this kind of circumstance. Like, and the thing that was really appealing about that game is like, all of those phenomena are systematic, right? And games are built systematically. Games are artifacts of systems. So I think it was a really good fit. But like that was an indie game that, a bunch of team of people that never worked together before, and we made something that we're all really proud of. And like again, it speaks to the elusive quest that like I feel like a lot of us who are marginalized game developers are on, right? How do we express our lived experiences through this art form, which seemingly can't be bothered to acknowledge them a lot of the time.
When you think about the
that was one question, y'all.
Yeah,
anyway, go ahead.
when you think about the black canon, so if we're comparing it to other art forms, we can see movements and groups of people and communities emerging at certain places and times, right? Do you feel like, and now we live in a time that's so distributed, maybe even more than any time before. Do you feel like, is it a necessary prerequisite to have a canon emerging or or a body of work that you can recognize as like these are the black games to have some kind of connection and community and people whose works are in communication with each other?
I think it's helpful because, each work that lands like creates space for something else to follow up, right? Like I was talking about Milestone Media before, and these were 4 black comics professionals in the 90s who were like, yep, I just hit my head on the glass ceiling for like the 99th time and I'm kind of done, and they banded together and created a company, and like that emboldened other collectives to follow suit, right? So like it was only because like
I'm going to put my picture of Dwayne McDuffie up on
yeah,
screen.
it was only because of them bonding together in the first place, right? Like, Christopher Priest, who's like probably the first thank you. Probably the first like full-time writer and editor both at Marvel and DC who was a black person. He has a story about how like the black freelancers would hang out in his office because they felt comfortable, right? And they all knew each other, like some of them personally and whatnot. And like the other staffers at Marvel would be like, what's going on in there? He's like, they're just waiting for their checks. It was paper checks. So Thursday's payday, so they're just waiting to get paid. But like, them knowing that they had that community amongst each other is where the creativity springs from. So like, I think, look, I don't necessarily think it's the job of creators to call something canonical or to fold it into a canon or not. Like that's really outside of their purview. It's more like critics and audience. But I think, as like this cycle keeps continuing in video games where, like we're on like 15, 20 years of like, hey, maybe the characters in these games could look a little different. Hey, maybe people from different walks of life could be helping craft this art form. So, and this, it just feels like each toehold is like so hard fought. So I think, just talking about a canon, just talking about things that resonate in a way that should be remembered and cataloged throughout the ages. Just having those conversations helps create space for different things. You know, like I remember when I first started consulting a couple of years ago, I was in the studio office, and you know, this developer says, "Hey, you're Evan Narcisse, right?" I'm like, "Yes." I'm like, "Uh-oh, my number's up." But he's like, "Yeah, you know, I read The Natural, and like I think about that all the time." And this was not a black person. This was a white game developer. And The Natural, for those who may not have read it, is, you know, a personal essay I wrote about how I can't create my own hair and character creators in most video games. And it's really about like other systematic things about the game industry, some of which have changed, some of which have not. But like, I wrote that because I knew I wasn't alone in feeling that way, right? And once you start to feel that you're not alone, you can create the kind of change, or at least find space to have conversations about creating change with the things that you feel like need to.
Do you feel like the hair situation is better now?
It's better. It's better. It is. You know.
Yeah,
like,
maybe due in part to this article, which is maybe this is like one of your top articles, by the way, that shows up with your name and games criticism. So it is one of your enduring legacies for sure, and maybe it's why, you know, if you play Baldur's Gate or something, there's like a lot more hairstyles.
Yeah, you know, like it I don't know what it's funny because, man, all right, I'm just gonna be real candid here. When I was working on the Miles Morales game, you know, do all that work in secret, and I'd feedback about, you know, all the things that make up the game. It's my job as a consultant, and but when the announce trailer hit, and Miles has that tight fade, and it's like, okay, he's been to the shop recently. Like a lot of people were like, "Oh, have you worked on that game?" Okay, I'm like, I don't do character art. I don't do this. This is not what I do. I'm a writer. I'll give you story feedback. But like, yeah, and you know, likewise, I've told my coworkers, I was like, look, any game I work on can't have fucked up hair, because I'm known for one thing in game criticism. So yeah, let's get this right.
So your presence somewhere on the team was like, whoa, character artists getting stressed out.
Yeah. Artists are showing me hair. I'm like, yeah, that looks good, I guess.
Wait, so let's talk about making that jump.
Yeah.
Because you worked for Kotaku until about, what like 2016, 2017? No, 2018.
No, wait. So I worked for Kotaku till about like 2016. 2016. And then I went to the sister site, IO9.
Oh, right. That's right. Okay.
Which is, you know, I did a lot of the same things. Mm-hmm. And then I left that company and journalism for the most part altogether in like 2018. Yeah. Yeah. So that's your question.
Yeah. So the question is like that, making that jump over from criticizing the form, from sort of thinking about what its cultural effects are, and then, deciding, hey, I'm going to write for games now.
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking because, you know, when I started writing comics, another form that I had written about for a long time, I had like enough of a knowledge base to understand, like, okay, I know what a script looks like, I know what the writer's job is, and the rest I'll learn as I go, right? But I at least knew a little bit enough to like, okay. And I had friends who were other professionals who were more than eager to help and tell me, you know, basic kind of like foundational knowledge. With video games, I didn't have that kind of like safety net, for lack of a better term. There's a lot more opacity around games. It's not as transparent. And, you know, the thing I've further learned is that, like, each studio does do it differently, right? So I didn't know, like, how much should I charge for my fee, for my services and stuff like that. And, you know, what does a game script even look like? And scripts all look different. And what are the processes? So that part was really, really nerve-wracking. What I did, the tools that I did know I had, like, on my belt was... like being able to like look at something like analytically and critically and hopefully holistically and figure out what are the storytelling opportunities that we could avail ourselves of here. So, but it was, you know, really eye-opening because, you know, one thing I've learned since stepping across the tracks or something into game dev is that like I understand why, as a creative discipline, like game dev as a whole, like really eats people alive, because there's a lot of fighting over ideas and there's a lot of interdisciplinary coordination. That's like, okay, you wrote down an idea. What it means to implement this idea in the engine is going to require this much animation, this much VO recording, this much level design, so on and so forth. So it's like, you know, 10 words on a piece of paper could be like hundreds of hours for people who are trying to bring that to life, right?
So, like if especially the words are like, Miles takes his shirt off and opens the door, and the programmers are like, no, are you totally out of your mind?
Well, it's funny because again, comics taught me, you know, when I talked to Ta-Nehisi Coates about writing Black Panther comics, he said the first time I had to sit down and break down a scene, you realize how hard it is to think visually, right? And then comics puts a further challenge on you because you have to freeze those moments, right? You can't describe an action in total. Like Miles walks across the room, you have to be like, okay, in the middle of the room, Miles is holding a bottle of water, you know, and like you're really freeze framing a story when you tell it in comics, right? And there's like this intuitive thing that we as readers do in between the panels. You assume certain actions happen. Maybe the scene changes, maybe, you know, the camera angle changes, and you just go with it because your brain is doing the job of filling in the gaps, right? So in video games,
Let's put this Bucky Barnes thing up. This is pretty good.
Thank you. That's probably my favorite issue of Rise of the Black Panther.
That's mine too.
So in video games, it's similar, right? You have to think about what is generally called scope very broadly, right? So like, and that is something I'm honestly still doing, right? You know, and like, you know, to answer the hidden part of your question is like, yeah, I work now with level designers who are like, oh, you're a motherfucking genius, because like you really are thinking about like, here's what we can do technically, right? And here's how we can cheat, hide, push, stretch the capabilities of the technology to achieve the idea. Or, you know, it's a dialogue, right? You have to collaborate. Sometimes you may have to rescope the idea, keep and edit it, and figure out, okay, what can we keep and still implement and have it still have the same kind of impact. And that's, you know, something about, you know, these two forms that I've worked in that is very similar. It's very much about like, okay, the give and take between different disciplines and different talents. You know, like when I was writing Rise of the Black Panther, I found out like late into the process, like, yeah, this artist doesn't like to draw facial expressions and body language. He likes to draw technology and robots and stuff. I'm like, nobody told me this. And I did wind up, you know,
I think that's how the techno jungle came into existence, by the way.
Yeah, somebody with Wakanda was like, you know, I don't really like all this nature
His name was Jack Kirby. He was like, I like drawing weird machines.
Yes.
Don't tell me to draw a jungle.
Yeah. But Kirby could draw anything he put his mind to, honestly. But yeah, like, you know, and as you work with collaborators, you have to figure out what their strengths are and what your strengths are and where they can meet together. It sounds kind of like, I don't know, trite, but like, it's really true. Like, you know, when I was writing the Gotham Knights series, you know, like I found that the artist I was working with had a real facility for like period clothing. You know, part of that was set in Gotham in the 19th century. So I was like, oh, he's really hitting this stuff. Like, okay, I don't have to worry about scaling those pages down because like he's having fun in this arena too. So
did you do more of it?
I did a little bit more of it. Yeah, yeah. Like, you know, that, like, you know, to talk about work for hire stuff, like that series was a prequel to the Gotham Knights game, and like they pretty much let me do what I wanted there, and like I definitely gave myself a harder job because I was writing across two different time periods and trying to see the mystery throughout both of them. I probably was punching above my weight there, but it was like kind of a story I felt like I wanted to tell and, you know, make it my own.
Yeah, that's how you grow, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I want to talk a little. I'm going to go back to talk about Spider-Man again. So the first game you worked on, I think, was not this one, but
it was the first Spider-Man game that Insomniac did, the Peter Parker game. And to say that I worked on it is being very generous. I can describe the exact nature of the assignment, which is like, hey, you know, they have these points of interest around the map that Peter's supposed to take pictures of. One of them is the Wakandan embassy, and they're like, could you, generate a couple lines that Peter would say when he's doing this activity at that location. So I gave them a bank of lines, and then they took them and implemented one in the game. And I was like, oh, okay, that was nice. What next?
Yeah, and so did you feel like that then led on to this?
Oh, it definitely did. It
right,
definitely
because
did.
then you did a lot more on Miles Morales,
yes,
right?
I worked on that game on Miles Morales. I think they had the story locked already, and they asked me for feedback, and then I started contributing on a regular basis. But yeah, like two of the side missions like have my fingerprints all over them in a more extensive way, and I like gave feedback like basically at every step of the process. And I remain really proud of that game. I think there's a texture to it that differentiates it from games in the same kind of sphere, right? Superhero games or action adventure games or Marvel games. I feel like it feels like more heartfelt, which is not to say the other ones don't, right? I think all the Spider-Man games that Insomniac has done are incredible. But this one feels like more intimate, for lack of a better term. Like it's like homey.
It has a neighborhood feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe a friendly neighborhood feel.
Yes. Thanks. Got to do it.
So I'm curious. So I want to go back to what you were saying about knowing how level design works and level designers saying, "Oh, you get it. You understand games." When you play the Sony Spider-Man games, I think particularly of the first one, there's this big plot, right? Kind of what you're describing is the story is locked.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, like big moments in that, are expressed through cutscenes, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody does have to take their shirt off, that you could do it in a cutscene, or like big events happen, like there's an explosion and some people die and things like that, right? My impression, and tell me whether how off I am in this. Like the big plot often feels like it's written in the style of that a screenplay would be written.
Oftentimes, yeah.
And then the smaller moments, the way a quest is written, right? The way dialogue happens in the moment that's not in a cutscene, that feels like where your knowledge of games would come into play more significantly, where they would appreciate you.
Yeah, like something I've learned and continuing to learn is like, user research in games is like such a big field, right? Like, it's granular to the point where it probably stops being useful, but if you want to avail yourself of that stuff, it is there. But, one of the things for me, I'm the kind of player is like, I want to hear every conversation that can be heard in a game, right? And, all these different disciplines that go into making a game, sound design, visual design, scenario design, all that stuff, are vectors for storytelling, right? So like the little hints that a character says to himself when they're trying to solve a puzzle, and really that's you as a developer gesturing at the players like, hey, you might do this. You can infuse that with personality, right? You can infuse that with texture and specificity and make the thing come alive in a way that, again, some other creators might not do, right? And I'm not saying that to like make a value judgment. It's just like, okay, some people may want the player to move through an experience really fast, right? And it hit the big plot beats and not dither around. But like, for the ditherers, you want something for them to latch onto, right? And stay memorable. So, like, I'm trying to think about, so long ago since I worked on Miles, but like, okay, here's one thing I can cite actually. And this is me stealing from the GDC talk that I'm going to give in 2 weeks, but whatever. Pretend like you didn't hear it. One moment that I had specific feedback on was there's a scene in Miles Morales where there's a big fight that happens on the bridge, and this big explosion happens, and then like the corporate armed thugs from the evil company have their guns drawn on Miles. I was like, we should have his skin showing through the costume, right? Which is already damaged, right? And one, it kind of magnifies the moment in terms of its metaphorical power, right? But two, from just a storytelling perspective, look, this is games happening in a Marvel world, right? In a Marvel universe. So, like, if you see two Spider-Man swinging around the city, you're like, oh, that one's a clone or a brother or a son or whatever. Like, if you show what makes Miles different from Peter through his costume, that changes the whole context, right? And then that cascaded down into systemic design, where me and Ben Arfman, who was the lead writer on the game, I was like, once the people in Harlem know that Miles could be one of theirs, they're going to treat him differently. They're going to say different. The ambient dialogue that fires in Harlem is there's a few buckets of it that are different. Like they're like, hey, keep up the good work. You just make us proud. Don't fuck up now. They're watching us. That kind of thing. Like, to really bring a sense of community in the way I experienced it growing up, right? Which is like, oh, okay, like you're flying the buttermilk, so you have to achieve above and beyond what your peers who come from different backgrounds might have to do. And that was real. That continues to be real. Yeah. And I was like, if we can gesture it at that in the game, like that'll, again, we'll be doing something that Peter's game doesn't do. Like one of the things I did do on the game was like, okay, what are the things that makes Miles different than Peter, right? Like, and how can we draw from the differences in their cultural backgrounds and the experiences they might have to create different texture and specificity in the game. And so, I think we achieved at least some of that.
And I remember that moment in the game, and it struck me that it had also just really, really deep roots in the history of comics.
Yeah.
Right, with this history of masked heroes, specifically who are covered from head to toe, like these two guys are. They're both black men.
Yeah, if you talk to comic fans, if you talk to black comic fans of a certain age, they'll be like, yeah, I thought Spider-Man was black. Like, because the cops hate him. He's always broke. His boss hates him. Yeah. Like, he's like, yeah, it's just, Peter Parker might be passing.
Definitely. And Black Panther too, though, right? Like
okay,
that.
Wow, that's going to be somebody's headline tomorrow. Anyway, go ahead.
But Black Panther too, right? So totally covered from head to toe.
Yeah, yeah.
And the original costume.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this. I don't have to tell you. You're like writing the comics, right? That the original first version of the Kirby costume, you see his skin.
Yeah. Yeah. The mouth opening was so you could see his face. Yeah, and then they covered it up because there were likely commercial reasons for that. Like, oh, okay, let's make him a little bit more mysterious on the cover. Covers are very important tools to sell comics, right? It's the first thing you see, and like it's got to be exciting. So, like, that first appearance of T'Challa in the Fantastic Four, I think it was 51. I used to know this off the top of my head. It's a couple of years, but anyway, he's kind of jumping at the reader, and you're like, oh, that guy looks interesting, and you don't find out, a couple of pages in. I think that issue starts with like at the Baxter Building, and the Fantastic Four having the usual dysfunctional family hijinks and whatnot, and then like I think you don't see Wakanda or T'Challa for the first couple of pages.
Don't they send? They send like a.
He sends a plane.
Send a plane, and they're like, "Well, why don't we get in this weird plane that show up?"
Yeah, and both the Thing and the Human Torch said this came from Africa, and I was like, "Wow!"
What?
And again, one of the things that's fascinating about the Black Panther's early appearances is that like Stanley and Jack Kirby, two middle-aged Jewish men, are both reinforcing and subverting a lot of the stereotypes about black people in Africa at the time, right? So they're like, yeah, there's this wondrous nation that's hidden, has all this amazing technology, but they're still wearing grass skirts. Like, it's like, okay, sure, I guess this is, you gotta keep some of that Tarzan bullshit in here.
Yeah, because Stan Lee is good at stereotypes. Jack Kirby really likes to draw weird-looking machines.
This is true.
Wakanda.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but like, I think that's the thing about storytelling when you're working like with, blackness as a material, right? And like blackness as we live through it today is like a sociological construct, right? It was created with a specific purpose to marginalize people.
Oh yeah.
But those of us who identify as black like have for centuries now subverted, amplified, we've made this thing that was foisted on us our own. And it's become a wellspring of innovation, of social justice, of all these different things that especially in America, contribute to the fabric of society and to the mythology that America tells us. It's the myths that America tells itself about itself, right? So like, when you're Stanley and Jack Kirby, you're not. People act like there was more intentionality than there probably was at the time.
I mean, I really meant it when I just said that.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. But like, one of the things I like to say about Black Panther and his publishing history is like, every time a black person touches Wakanda, it changes. It takes these evolutionary jumps. Ta-Nehisi starts writing the book. When Ta-Nehisi started writing the book, there was like one city in the country, and it was called Central Wakanda. It didn't have a name. Like, he's like, hey, let's put different cities on the map. Like let's reimagine the map.
It became a political entity.
Yeah. So like, and he wasn't the first to do some of that like reimagining in terms of like geopolitical stuff. That's actually been a hallmark of the character since about the 70s. But like, I think it becomes the most amplified when Christopher Priest, a black man, touches it. Like. And then Ta-Nehisi kind of inherits that. And then all the other writers that have followed in his wake, it's been an explicit part of the latter-day Black Panther lore.
Right, because Priest was the first black man to write the comic, right?
I'm pretty sure he was.
Because before that, the artist in the 70s.
Yeah, Billy Graham was an artist in the 70s, yeah. And Don McGregor, is a lot of what the building blocks for how we now think about Wakanda in present day started with Don McGregor, who's, I think Scottish, Welsh descent. But, he thought about it as a place that had its own internal politics and factions and whatnot, which a lot of people didn't do before that.
Right, and he was working with a black man, so he's like, I got to get this hair right, otherwise I'm gonna come to work and be embarrassed.
Yeah.
What do you think of Aaron Davis up here on the screen? Prowler on the left there.
Oh man, I'm just trying to think. What can I say? I'll say this, and I don't know if the other developers who've worked on the game have even talked about it. But like, I remember I was on the project early enough where like Uncle Aaron wasn't even in the game. Like, it was like maybe we'll bring him in as like a side character, right? Like on a side mission. Like,
yeah, because he's always a little bit in the background, right?
Yeah,
like they're teasing him in the Spider-Man movies.
Yes, yeah.
With
Donald Glover.
Donald Glover showed up.
Yeah. Like this relationship was really important to me because it's like there's grief at the core of it. There's a sense of like asymmetrical responsibility, right? Like, Miles is a character who has seen his father die. His father was like a heroic figure in his life, and his father is also Aaron's brother. And so like Aaron tries to intervene in his life in a way that is disproportional, right? He's like, I want to protect you to the point of like locking you up. Spoilers if you haven't played the game. But like, for me, it was like, okay, what are the specific, again, for me, it's like, I've come to hate the word authenticity when I talk about like doing culture work in video games, because like my authenticity might be different than Austin's authenticity or somebody else's authenticity, right? Like, we grew up different ways, we have different lived experiences, we're both black, but like there's lots of space between me and him. I love you though. Like, the thing I always try to think about like invoking is like specificity, right? So like, in this instance, it's like, okay, what does it mean to, grieve in a particular way? What does familial estrangement look like? Like, what does it look like to try and, be a hero while you're also doing all those other things, right? And they're both dealing with that, right? Like, Aaron's not quite a hero. He's at best an anti-hero, but like he sees the need to change because of what this young person in his life might need, right? So like, I experienced that, like, especially becoming a father, and even growing up, it was like, okay, like, who are the people that I felt like served as my mentors when I felt like I needed one? I talked about starting my journalism career at NYU, and like, the Professor David Dent was like somebody, at one point he's like, yeah, we think of you as like a son. Is before he had his own kids. And I was like, wow, I never expected to hear that. But like, I did cook for him. a couple of times. But it was something I was like, oh, this goes beyond just like the relationship that is obvious, right? Professor student, and it's like, okay, for him, he's like very much like, hey, I'm helping shape the next generation of black journalists, right? Like, and he took that very seriously. So like, that was some of the stuff that was going through my head when you know, I was giving feedback and helping work on the game with this storyline. Yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I thought it was so cool how you guys were able to put Aaron and Prowler into the game.
Yeah.
And then, you know, that character, I think, become more prominent because of the Spider-Verse movies, right? Where the morning is in reverse, right? And he dies, but then, you know, whatever, the other evil version of him doesn't die. But he's all, you know, it's really funny. I always thought of him as like the first Black Spider-Man.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he originally shows up as a pal of Peter Parker's, who's like, I'm actually, you know, more ingenious than Peter Parker, because I have no money, but I'm climbing around all these buildings.
Yes. Yeah. You know, it's funny because like that is something about how I think, again, these two different forms of entertainment, comics and video games, like you always see black characters slide in from like stage left, right? Like they're not in the spotlight, but like they slide in, and you know, one of the things I talk about, you know, because I've had to write about Black Panther and write Black Panther, right? And when you look at his publishing history, like he waxes and wanes depending on whether there's somebody who's a steward for the character, right? You know, like Steve Englehart, like took a liking to him in the 70s, so he shows up in a bunch of Defender stories, right? And Avengers stories, even when he's not a member of the team. Like,
best 70s writer.
See, we're right here, you and me. But, you know, like, and I think it's the same thing with games, right? Like, games are obviously different because, like, the financial outlay to make a big AAA game this means that, like, hey, it's got to focus test a specific way and blah, 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 this and that. But, like, that's one of the things I like about comics as a form is, like, it's very accessible. And, you know, you can write a story or draw a story that has big, wide-ranging consequences, like for very little amount of money. That means
it's true.
Yeah.
That really affects like the storytelling for many generations.
Yeah, you can take big risks. You know, like you look at what the MCU is now on the screen, and you're like, man, how are they gonna do the X-Men? Like, because you have to do so much with the X-Men. That's a question that's in my group chats all the time. It's like, what are they going to do there? I don't know, but good luck.
Yeah, and then you might be dealing with it pretty soon. Well, I mean, you're working on Wolverine now, right?
I did some work on Wolverine, yes. I announced that. So you're really just trying to get a brother fired up in here. But yes, that was announced. So I'm safe, I think. Yes.
Yeah. So that's some mutants going on there. But yeah, I mean that's the consequence of you know, both of these black guys being covered up, right? That's you know, that's why I said I should probably explain why I said I think of Aaron Davis as the first Black Spider-Man. Yeah. Because he pretends to be Spider-Man on more than one occasion. They brought that back multiple times. Where he's like, I got to dress up as Peter Parker so that Peter Parker can be like, I'm not Spider-Man. Look, Spider-Man's right over there. But it's really a black guy pretending to be Spider-Man.
Yeah. The cops really hate him. Anyway.
And he predates both his brother and his nephew, right, in comics. Yeah. But speaking of which, so as a New Yorker, as a black man, and as a writer of comic books and games, like, what do you think of the unfortunately named Jefferson Davis? NYPD.
Look. Remember what I said before about cultural literacies? Like, and I'm not, this is half a joke, but mostly serious. That's what this is, right? Like, if you don't know how those two words put together hit for people of African descent, then I don't know what to tell you.
Who did that? Brian Michael Bendis?
I believe so, yes. Yeah.
Okay. So he was just like, huh?
And look,
but it's like that's not from another dimension.
No.
Where it's only black people. Yeah. That's just the Civil War.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That happened in the white people dimension.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to call my life now.
Yeah.
Adventures in the white people dimension.
Yeah.
You know, it's just It's just really unfortunate. Like, you know, you can't foolproof every bit of creation, right? But I think that's just something where, like, it just highlights the importance of us needing to be in the room. I think needing to be in the spaces when creation is happening at its most basic level. And you know, I've gotten to know Bendis a little bit, and he's a decent guy. You know, I think, you know, Miles would not exist for him, so like credit is due there. But like, I think at the end of the day, again, hearing the name Jefferson Davis may not have set alarm bells off for him, but like, you know, I'm not gonna sit here and name somebody, you know, the uncle of a character, Idi Amin, you know, like I'm just not gonna do that because I'm like, yeah, you know what, not a name to repurpose in my fiction. So like I said, cultural literacies, like that's the thing I think all of us individually bring to the table when we start to tell stories. And I think the more of those you can bring to bear, right? The more possibility space you can open up in your endeavors.
And I think of Jefferson Davis as being sort of like Miles Morales's Lois Lane or J. Jonah Jameson. Like, it's like the regular person who's always like, oh shit, this person's gonna find out that I'm a superhero, and he's a cop, right? Not a journalist.
Yes, yeah. No, you always need that character in this kind of fiction, right? Where like the pressures of the dual life, like, face their most like volatile threat in this person. It's not a supervillain, right? It's a person who can be like, hey, your life is dissonant in these ways, and it's my job to highlight it. And then now what? You know, like in latter day Superman comics, at least one phase of them, he revealed his identity to the world, and his boss Perry White is like, basically you're a fucking liar. Like I can't trust anything you've ever done because you've been lying to me the whole time, and it's your job to tell the truth.
For a really long time.
Yeah, it's your job to tell the truth. So I think Jeff is that kind of character. But you know, to me, it's more interesting. You know, I'm not current on the most recent run of Miles's comics, but the run that Saladin Ahmed wrote, like, you know, his whole family finds out that he's a superhero, right? To me, it's more interesting. Okay, how does this now become a family effort, right? Like, how does it, like, how do you, all the ideas that you as a family might have about justice, about following the law, about doing what's right, like, you know, his mom wants to protect him because that's her baby boy. His dad is like, you know, if you're gonna do it, you should do it this way, or be careful about this X, Y, and Z. And Miles is like, no, I'm gonna do it my way. So like all the things about parent-child relationships get heightened by virtue of everybody being in on the secret now. To me, that's like a really rich storytelling space.
Nice. I should have said also as a father.
Yeah, it's fine.
But maybe this is implied. Yeah, I want to talk. I think we should talk a little bit about the whole like being in the room, because I'm really glad that we're talking about all the nuanced ways that when you come into a project, like what that's like. And you are, you know, one of many narrative consultants who are working on these projects. Yeah. But I think about halfway through your time at Kotaku, things really changed.
Yes, they did.
Right. Before, I feel like before 2014, Kotaku was sort of like, people were like griping or grousing about it. And then suddenly in 2014, when Gamergate happened, like Kotaku was like the devil.
Yeah, it was hard because, you know, I was still, I think, turning out work that I thought was good, you know, or trying to improve my craft at all times. And then, you know, here comes this large, you know, harassment campaign, conspiracy movement, whatever you want to call it, that is casting aspersions on why I do what I did, you know, well, he's only writing about black people in video games because, like, he wants to score points, or he has an agenda. My agenda is, like, trying to figure out what the expression of the most full expression of black humanity can be in any art form. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's, you know, that's because I feel like there are storytelling possibilities in my lived experience, which I'm not seeing in this art form that I love. Like, if you want to call that an agenda, fine. But like, guess what? Creators since time immemorial have been doing this, but like to assign it to like an evil, venal set of motivations, like was really, really hard. And I didn't get it as bad as a lot of other people did, to be sure. That movement and those movements continues to target, women, queer people, and like anybody who they see is like, less privileged and more vulnerable, more precarious. So like I didn't get as lot, but I did get called an Uncle Tom, during Gamergate, and
For what exactly? For working?
I believe I went on CNN. The segment was about women in video games, and they asked a couple of questions about Gamergate, and I answered them to the best of my ability, I got called an Uncle Tom for that. If I remember correctly, it was by another black person, but my former colleague Kyle Wagner, who I think was writing at Deadspin at the time, wrote one of the earliest articles about how Gamergate was the blueprint for, the 24/7 culture wars that we find ourselves in now. So he was right about that. And, what continues to animate me, what continues to get me up in the morning and like face my own fears. Like I started working in a game engine for the first time a couple of years ago, and I'm like, wow, this shit is hard. But the reason I continue to do it is because like, I know what it means to like live my life as a black person in this world, in a world that's ordered against you, systematically, legislatively, like, programmatically designed to push us to the margins. And I know what it's like to find joy and glory and community and fellowship, and excellence despite all of that. And like video games have yet to show me what it looks like on the screen. And that's why I do it. And like the fact that our existences piss people off to the point where they have to organize these campaigns or craft conspiracy theories just lets you know that in very real ways, our society as a whole in this nation and across this globe is not really ready to reckon with what it means, the legacy of all that brought us to this point, right? I don't feel this way just because I woke up one day like, you know what? I'm mad about, racism. Like, racism has been going on my entire life, my dad's life, my mom's life, their parents' lives, and the way it's been institutionalized and embedded in the fabric of the whole world is something that if you wake up in our skin, in our circumstances, you have to fight against. And like, I'm not the most revolutionary brother in the world. Like, I have to find my footing as the landscape changes around me, right? But like, I can't not do what I do, Dwayne McDuffie, one of the founders of Milestone Media, I interviewed him way back when, and I forget the exact quote, but he was like, I write about what concerns humanity, and I'm paraphrasing here. In American society, there's very little that concerns humanity more than race, right? And like he's one of my heroes. Like another one of my heroes, Sonny Rollins, jazz saxophonist. He put an album out in 1958 called The Freedom Suite, and he wrote a little statement, basically saying how America profits off the Negroes, inventiveness, innovation, art, culture, but pushes him down in society. And to me, it's like it's 2023, and an art form that I love has the capacity, if we push it hard enough, to speak to like the lived experiences of me and people like me. Like, I think there's a responsibility there. I think there's an opportunity there. I think, great stories can come out of just making room for black people behind the screen in the studios, wherever we can find purchase to like figure out what this craft looks like when we're part of it. Like, I don't think that's too much to like reckon with if this is your hobby of choice.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Yeah. You know, when we were preparing for this talk a couple weeks ago, I was going to ask you about exactly what you just said. Like, okay, 2014 Gamergate, like people were coming after you, but they're mostly targeting women. Yeah. I think more than anything. But then, you know, we got to this week, and I was like, okay.
I just think it's really
because if people don't know, you know.
So like again, like simple comparative analysis, like the film world, right? Like who does anybody? Okay, I have to think about the right way to say this. It is not a prevailing idea that film as a form of art should only tell one kind of story about one kind of person. Like, it is not the same thing in literature or music. So like, you know, video games as a form of art, like, is younger, more modern than some of those forms, and definitely more interactive, obviously. So like, why should it be like hidebound by like a small cohort of angry consumers who feel like, oh, okay, but when I was growing up, you know, the games were all like this, and the women all look like that, and the heroes all look like this. Like, why lock this art form to one like paradigm when there's so much space for it to expand, right? You know, like that's what I was saying about like canon and black canon and like what it means to express black experiences through an art form. Like, all these other art forms have done it and survived and grown and evolved. Like, so what are we saying when you were like, oh, okay, you're forcing diversity into video games? Like, no, there's a whole wide world out there, and if video games is really going to call itself an art form that can stand shoulder to shoulder with the other ones, let's reckon with the whole totality of human experiences. Like, there's a lot of stories to tell in a lot of different ways. Like, why not, you know, allow for people to try and tell them? So this harassment campaign around Sweet Baby and the people that work there, some of whom are really close friends of mine, is utterly fucking ridiculous. Like, it you know, these are just people trying to do their job and make stories better. Like, you know, script doctors exist in Hollywood. You know, beta readers exist in literature. Like, every form of creation has people who help buttress the work, inform the work, like recontextualize the work, and improve the work. And that's all that they do. Like, I did the exact same job as them, you know, on some of the same games even. So like, it is maddening to me that this is happening. And I told myself I wasn't gonna go this far, but like, it makes me that upset. It's really unfair. And like, this is, I'm just gonna say it, this is like anti-blackness to its motherfucking core. Like, you know, we exist. We exist in a full spectrum of lives and possibilities that, like I said, depending on how culturally literate you are in whatever kind of sphere you operate in, you may not even know about. But just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. Doesn't mean we don't get to tell our stories and do our jobs and do our work. Man, I need some water. And the other thing y'all need to know about me, shout out to my dad and my mom, like, I'm a Haitian. What does that mean? What does that mean? That means that our island existed under colonialism until we threw off the yoke of colonialism. And our lives have been circumscribed in history in very onerous ways by virtue of that. You know, when I grew up, seeing news reports about Haiti, it was like, oh, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. You know, the data point that was always left out of those news reports was like, well, why? Because Haiti was forced to pay, quote unquote, reparations back to France after the revolution. So they were paying millions of dollars back to France for the right to be free. That's like extortion to the highest level. So, like, we fight. Like, we fight against white supremacy. Like, that's what we do. Like, so if you're hearing any of that, that's why. I probably can't help it.
Shout out to St. Louis. Yeah, and the thing that really strikes me about this latest thing, that I've got up on the screen, there are a bunch of different news articles. Actually, I had the Kotaku one under there, but I thought this one, because it has 2 Spider-Men, maybe even more appropriate. But it's just the sheer cluelessness, right? But willful cluelessness. The AAA games, how many lines of text are in these games?
Like the tens of thousands, you know?
Yeah, and they're not all being written by like one group of people.
The sheer amount, and I hate using the word content, but I'll use it here. But the sheer amount of content in your average AAA video game, like, it's just too much work for one person to do. Like
it wouldn't even be a good idea.
No,
right?
No.
For all the side quests to be written by one person,
right.
They would get incredibly samey. That's part of why they're farmed out to a lot of people, right?
Yeah, like. And I'm experiencing this now, working in-house at a studio. Like, when you work on the same thing for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, like, you really can't see the forest for the trees anymore. So part of what you do as an outside consultant is, like, you provide a fresh perspective. Hey, if I were to pick up the controller with this line in the game as it is right now, I'd be like, I don't know. They kind of missed on this one. And that's what your job as a consultant to do, right? Like, you stand in for the player, but also you fill in the gaps where there are things that, again, because of this intense years-long familiarity with the project, like, I don't even hear this line anymore. But like, somebody else will hear it in a different way, or think about ways to order a scene differently, And again, these are always suggestions. You never get to make the final call on what makes it in the game that ships, Like, if a decision that you made, or a suggestion that you made rather, makes it in, it's because somebody higher up on the food chain decided to co-sign that and implement it in the game. Like, it's as simple as that. It is, often thankless work too. Because you work as a consultant, you put in your hours, and you might be casting about for the next gig. After that's done. I was lucky enough not to find myself in that kind of scenario. Ever since I became a narrative design consultant, the work was consistent, and now I'm in-house at Brass Lion. But it is the same kind of work for hire experience as in comics or TV or other forms where, like, it's contract-based work. So, like, when you're just trying to, like, make sure you can sustain a career in your creativity, who's got time for conspiracies? Who's got time for, like, evil hand-wringing and plan making? You're like, okay, like, will I be able to keep doing this? And with this industry in the state that it is now, like, that is a more pressing question than any kind of evil agenda that these people may think may be happening.
Yeah, no, of course. And and I think it's worth talking about, like, how narrative consulting works in this room, because we're at a games program. A lot of people may be hoping to do this kind of work, but I don't know. It's I saw Mary Kenny, alum of the Game Center, and narrative designer who's worked with you on Miles Morales.
Yeah.
You guys both worked on Wolverine too, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And she was like, for a long thread on Twitter, trying to be like, oh, let me lay it out for you, like, how this works, why this is not sinister or anything. And I don't know, I just sort of feel like it falls a bit on deaf ears, right? Because the whole, like, I don't understand how game development works, like, I'm clueless about it, sort of.
And I think that's one of the things it's one of the things when I was a journalist that really frustrated me.
Yeah.
Because, people know game titles, franchises, or studios. They don't know individual creators. And granted, making video games is a team sport for sure. But, like, and there's, the evils of authorship are well documented, right? Like, to think that any one person is responsible for what goes into a game is kind of folly. But one of the things that frustrated me was, like, you'll have a game that sells, millions of copies, makes, hundreds of millions of dollars, and the average person who plays it can't name a person who worked on it, right? They don't know what they did. So I feel like the facelessness of a studio or the facelessness of a collective like really robs individual creators of the ability to grow their craft, right? And I think one of the things that is particularly tricky for a narrative design consultant or any kind of consultant or outsourced companies is like, you know, will you be able to realize your own vision, or rather you have to subsume your vision sometimes in service of the larger project the client wants to make. But if you're lucky, you know, and I've been lucky in the games I've worked on where like, yeah, they actually want to know what I think and what I think can improve the experience. So it's very asymmetrical, but like I think, you know, compared to movies or other forms of mass media, games suffer that problem exponentially more because there's so much mystery around the craft, right? Like, you know, as all these conversations around video games and labor movements happen, it's really, I think, interesting to compare it to movies because one of the things that unions and the labor apparatus in movies make possible is knowledge sharing. You know, there's a standardization. So like, hey, how does Spike Lee does that dolly shot? Or how does this DP do that dolly shot? How does this person achieve this effect on screen? And because, you know, there are craftspeople who can talk about their craft and how they did it openly, you get to share that knowledge. So if you're a budding filmmaker or going to film school, like, I'll just do what this person did. I'll read about this process. There's so little of that in games, at least AAA games, that like it really, I think, feeds the fallacy that only good games are only made one kind of way. And by one kind of person.
And by a monolith. Like, oh, there's a bunch of people, but they're all faceless, and they must sort of just think in lockstep. Yeah. All they care about is like satisfying the player.
And that could not be further from the truth.
Right. So how could there be a black person in there who actually cares about Black lives, Black history, Black experience? Yeah. Because that just wouldn't make sense, right? So it must be an alien force.
But again,
coming in from outside, from the Black dimension. Yeah. You know, the brother from another dimension show up. And
how do you get there?
you have to have a lived experience, I guess.
No, but yeah, it's, you know, I think the consumerist like point of view for this art form like really does a disservice to the creative aspects of the art form, right? Like, and again, I'm not saying anything that's like revolutionary, but like, you know, thinking of a game as something that like is supposed to hit certain marks for you as a consumer and not necessarily surprise you or open up your worldview to other kinds of lived experiences, I think is really reductive and like dangerous for the art form as a whole. You know, like if we're just doing square-jawed white guys, you know, ad infinitum, then like who's gonna keep showing up for that? And I grew up reading superhero comics, but like the minute I started to see people who look like me on those pages, on the editorial pages, in the editorial credits or creative credits, like I was like, oh, okay, there might be a way for me to find my way into doing this kind of work. Yeah. And like again, like video games deserves the same kind of possibility.
I'm gonna ask you one question that's sort of along this axis that I think maybe is worth cracking open a little bit. Do you think that Is there a way to bring the lived experience of people who aren't represented in games? And you know, we could be talking about Black people, talking about women, LGBTQ people, that doesn't work as well. That is awkward or like bonks you on the head.
Sure, there is. Yeah.
I mean, like, how do you think? How should we distinguish that? So I think about and. Forgive me if Manveer is watching this, but Mass Effect Andromeda, this is the first example that comes to mind. They like suck a trans character into that game, and the trans character is like, "Well, if you didn't know, I'm trans, and this is what my name used to be," or something like that. And it's like, what just happened? I just walked up to this character and I got smacked with a sign that says, "I'm a trans character."
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how.
If it's obviously like, look, if it's heavy-handed or tokenistic, right? Yeah. Like, you know, where like the identity, the marginalized identity of the character is the only thing they talk about, or all their storylines are centered around this. Like, to the exclusion of all else, then you're robbing that character of dimensionality, right? There's like facets and contours and a shape to the person's life that you're missing out on because you're focusing on one part, right? Like, like, I can't dance really well. And I'm very self-conscious when I dance. My brother's a great dancer. My dad, my grandfather was a choreographer, ran a national theater in Haiti. So like I'm the guy who the gene skipped. But if all you knew about black people were stereotypes that we can all dance, then you'd be like, oh yeah, sure, you can, do a two-step or whatever. I'm like, I just feel self-conscious about it because, like, I was never as comfortable getting my groove on, like, on the dance floor as my brother was. But does that mean I'm not black or I'm lesser than black? Or does it mean, like, any story you tell about me has to focus on me not being able to dance? I hope not. I hope that would be a really bad story, right?
Maybe get just a little side mention in one panel.
But like, if you reduce any character to one trait about themselves, then like, what kind of story are you telling? Like, how are you doing a service to the story, or are you focusing on some weird little fetishistic interpretation that like probably says more about you as a creator than the character as a wholly originally imagined entity?
Yeah. Do you like Samuel Delaney?
Yeah. I've read my deep Delaney moment was like back in college. But yeah, I think he's somebody who like defies any like codification because of the life he lives and the stories he's written.
Yeah, I mean, he says he has some good essays about characters. Sometimes, if you take a design class with me here, sometimes I sign them for writing. But he says, that to have a character who really feels like a protagonist, they have to break some stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right? They have to sort of be anti-stereotypical in at least one way. And to have for a character of dimensionality, you have to see them doing things that are purposeful, and things that are frivolous, and then also things that sort of react to others in their environment, right? And like otherwise, you just have a flat character.
I now want to read Dahlgren again. Anyway.
Yeah. No, Dahlgren's great.
Yeah.
So I guess we can say, there are good and bad ways of doing this. And what really strikes me about this, I don't know. I guess I'm just going to take a little moment to say what pisses me off.
Do it, sure.
About this.
Everybody get angry.
It's first the assumption that if you see something you don't like, that like a flat, like poorly written character, that that must have been the consultant who came in who did that. Really, when it's actually.
We don't spend that much time on the projects,
Well, that's one thing, but also if a company's aware of like, some of this stuff is like not testing well. People are like, what was up with that character? That's why you bring in a consultant, right? To try and fix those problems. It doesn't mean that every single one of this is going to be fixed because it's like, 50,000 lines of dialogue or whatever, right? So it's the assumption like, well, this must have been caused by the consultants if it's like a flat, poorly written character. And then, that's all that the consultants work on, right? It's only the black characters, right? Which is also not true. Right?
No, it's like, you give feedback on like the whole experience, right? Mm-hmm. And your work engages with the whole experience, right? So it's not just like, the characters who you may share some lived experiences with. It's like everybody, like, I'm hard pressed to think of any examples right now, but like any time that a story feels like, okay, you're leaving some meat on the table, right? Like, is your job as a consultant to be like, are there ways we can explore this, And then you work with the rest of the team, right? Again, like, no one moment in any video game that ships, especially in AAA space, is just because of one person being like, no, this is going in. That person can be a hard-headed asshole who pushes the decision through the process, right? But like, if it gets implemented, like, other people were party to that. And I'm not saying that to like spread blame or anything like that. I'm saying this like, these things are too big. There are too many moving parts in your average AAA video game for like any one person to like be like, you know what? No, I'm making this call. Like, this is a dialectical process, right? There's like give and take. And anybody who feels like, I think they know how this stuff happens. Look, I wrote about games for years. And until I started helping develop games, you know, I didn't realize that, you know, how much these things change in the process, you know? Like, you can start with a roadmap and a plan, but, like, you find new opportunities for new mechanics. You know, it could be something like that a button press does something different, or it could be a line of dialogue happening under different conditions. But, like, all that stuff changes, like, during the process. And, like, I think that's one of the reasons that I wish there were more transparency around how games were made, because especially the big budget ones, like, it is so hard to get anything that feels at least a little bit cohesive and, like, compelling on the screen. So
it's kind of a miracle when when a moment comes across and really hits. Right?
Yeah. And like, I think anyway, that's all I'm gonna say about that. Yeah.
So in summary, I really, the racism here is like, how dare you have the temerity to be black and exist, and to actually get hired to do some creative work,
but
and to say anything about your own experience, right?
When such attitudes persist, like, it really limits the possibility space for, like, people who want to get into this industry, but also what the industry itself can do. Like, not for nothing, I'm still waiting for video games to make or do the right thing. I'm still waiting for video games to make, like, a Malcolm X. Like, fuck it, give me the Wiz. Like, I'm still waiting for, like, that level of resonance. And if you allow, like, a really reactionary cohort to, like, peddle conspiracies like this, then the whole art form, not just me or Austin or anybody else, like, the whole art form is gonna suffer. And I think if video games as a medium really wants to put on its big boy pants and says we're worthy of cultural, acknowledgement, like, then this bullshit needs to go.
Right. Yeah, and because the people who are against it don't want that, right? They just want something to sort of like to suck on like a thumb.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Look, I find comfort in lots of different kinds of entertainment, right? But, like, I also consume entertainment that pushes me, Yeah. Like, I read and watch movies that make me uncomfortable or tell me about, the lives of other people who I may not interface with directly. And, like, again, like, if video games wants to be considered a storytelling art form that is mature, then it needs to make space for those kind of stories too, and experiences too.
Agreed. I want to open it up for questions soon, but first I'm gonna talk to you about comics for a second.
Sure.
I don't know if you knew this, Evan. I've read a lot of Marvel comics, and including all of yours.
Thanks.
But so you did all these, like, really fun first time T'Challa meets different characters, Namor, and we already did the Bucky one here, and Doom. What was your favorite one to this, history of T'Challa? And, first time he meets so and so.
Probably the Doom one, because for those of you who don't know, T'Challa first appears in the Fantastic Four comic as an antagonist. He lures them to Wakanda so he can fight them to make sure he's ready to face the person who killed his dad. And he almost beats them. So to me, it's like, if you're Dr. Doom and you spent all this time getting your ass kicked by these 4 people who you hate, and this one young king in an African nation almost takes them out, you're like, I want to meet that guy. Like, let's find out what he's about. And that was a story that, to my recollection, wasn't told in a Black Panther story. So I was like, yeah. And the way he does it, like, he sends a robot, like, into Wakanda during a brief window when, like, the security apparatus of the nation is down, and the robot's sitting on the throne, so T'Challa walks on the throne. There's, like, the Dr. Doom robot on there. I was really proud of that. That and the Namor one, like, again, I'm not the first person to kind of write about their similarities and differences, but I think, anchoring it in the fact that, like, yeah, to the Atlanteans, Namor is like a half-breed, like, mongrel, right? He's like, oh, you got that gross pink skin. Like, we don't want you here. And there's people who hate him because of the way he looks and because he's half air breather. So I thought that, Namor fighting against a racist Atlantean was a nice hook to have their interaction in that story.
Yeah. I mean, they're really good Monarch foils, right?
Yes.
Did you read like Supervillain Team Up when you were doing?
Oh
these?
God, yes. Yeah. That was back issue bins, but yeah. I found a few of those.
Because they played around with some of that stuff, but there was very like hokey 60s style.
Well, do you know the thing? And you saw a little bit of this discourse when the second Black Panther movie came out. Was Bill Everett, the guy who created the Submariner in the 1930s? He kind of wrote Namor as like a marginalized person. There's panels from those comics where it's like, this.
Well, the first issue ends with him yelling, "And now I go to fight the white man."
Yeah,
and
it's like, aren't you? Yeah. So, again, I think, you see this in these fandom communities, right? It happens in comics too, right? Where, they valorize the white straight male character, but like Superman was an anti-establishment rabble rouser in his first couple of appearances, right? He's hanging a corrupt politician off a power line. There's a person, he intervenes in a domestic violence situation and he smacks the guy around who was smacking his wife around. Like, he's like, how do you like it? So like, that's Superman, right. To think that like, he's like, a super Chad is really getting it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this scene, you're having, Dr. Doom is making like goulash for T'Challa, right?
Yeah. Look, you're just gonna get me way into my comics nerd bag, but like one of the things I want to play with this is like, in this scenario, like T'Challa's a child of privilege, right? He's raised in the palace, never wanted for anything. Dr. Doom is like coded as Roma in the Marvel universe, right? Like itinerant culture, like they lived hand to mouth, and his dad dies, and then his mom sells her soul to the devil. So he broke. Doom was a broke boy, basically, and so like he's like, hey, here's some of my family stew, my family's recipe, and like T'Challa's like, I guess sure, we're in Latveria, this is what you do. But like the contrast between these characters are really really fun to me. Yeah,
it's great. I feel like, so I think when you were writing this, I wrote you like a 50-page email about it.
Yeah.
I want to apologize to you.
No, it's all good. No, look. Knowing that Professor Clark is a big ass comic book nerd like me, I was sending her my scripts as I was working on them. And she's like, ooh. At one point, in fact, this one, I remember that 15-page email or however long it was. You're like, you have Doom refer to himself in the third person this many times. The last person who did it this many times. I'm like, wow. Thanks.
And that was in a Blade comic too. So it was like,
yeah. But you get the fun thing about getting to play with these toys is like, you get to reinforce certain understandings, subvert them, add your new material to them, and like my hope is that like, look. In 10, 15, 20 years, somebody will pick up a comic I wrote or a game I worked on and be like, hey, this inspires me to do my own thing. Let me put my own twist on this stuff. Like, and that, again, that's the point I've been making throughout this whole talk is like, that's how these mediums grow. That's how, by constant infusions of new blood, new perspectives, new possibilities, like, otherwise they wither and die, and I don't want that for video games. Yeah. Like, at least not before I can get a good goddamn black story out of one of them.
Yeah, amen. And okay, very, very last question. If you could write any comic book character, who would you pick? Like an existing one, let's say. Like, because we're talking about canon and building on it and all that stuff.
I've been lucky enough to write most of the ones, a few of the ones I really care about, like some of the Milestone characters in Black Panther and Batman. I have a back pocket pitch for Amazing Man, who's this black superhero from the 1940s, created in the 1980s, but his adventures take place in the 1940s. I wrote one short story for him. I have a whole pitch that maybe someday DC will let me do.
That's good. You could really bring back Amazing Man and kind of like have the second. Coming of Amazing
The
Men.
pitch is circling in their offices. People have read it.
You have to redesign the costume, though.
I kind of like the costume.
You like the costume? This is kind of.
I mean, for a modern day version, yes. Anyway,
that's a garish costume. Am I remembering right?
it's like green and yellow.
Green and yellow, yeah. Okay.
With a lot of black in it. So it'd be him. Okay, this is mostly public. This is on Twitch, whatever. But like, I have a pitch for the Bradley family in Marvel Comics. Isaiah Bradley was one of the black soldiers that the super soldier serum was experimented on, and in a miniseries called Truth, written by I want to say Bob Morales and drawn by Kyle Baker. A storyline that kind of drew inspiration from the Tuskegee experiments, and his grandson Elijah Bradley became a superhero called Patriot, and there's another character in between them generationally called what's his name? Josiah X.
That's
Thank you,
right.
Steve.
Josiah X.
I was getting there. Yeah, but I think a black family connected to the superheroic manifestation of patriotism is just such interesting fodder. I think David Walker is working on a Patriot series, so that door's probably closed to me. But yeah, I had some ideas in that space.
Because they got to spin that up because I think it's
The MCU
yeah,
part of it
Elijah was in
Falcon Winter Soldier. Yeah,
right, and now
yeah.
they're getting ready for Young Avengers or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're going to do a Patriot series.
Yeah, so those are the two I can think of off the top of my head. There's probably more.
Nice.
But yeah, if I'm lucky, I get to keep playing in these spaces for a little while longer. Maybe some more new opportunities will pop up.
Awesome.
Do we have time for these?
Yeah,
people
we
to
do
ask
have
questions?
time for questions. We're gonna be here till. Oh, seriously? I thought this is my fault. I thought we had till 9. But that's probably one of our reservations. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, come ask questions. If you want to ask a question, come down this aisle right now, and come to this microphone. Yeah, go for it.
So without further ado, so we can actually finish this. By the way, thank you. And my question is, when you worked in a industry where it is largely dominated by white men and other like culture that isn't your own, how do you trust yourself to appropriately and present it in a helpful way? And just speaking to myself, for how many years I've lived in China, I still have literally no idea what is a helpful or correct way to present it in a way.
I mean, I think the first thing you have to do is rid yourself of that kind of context, right? Like, the most onerous thing about being a person of color or a marginalized person in spaces that are where you're not overly represented is this idea that you have to represent for every person of your ilk, right? Like, I can't speak for every black person that will ever pick up a controller. Like, it's just literally impossible. But like, if you can articulate, I guess, the honesty and the texture of your experiences, like, you can get at the truth that you're trying to communicate to people, So it's like, I talk about being proud of being Haitian, but honestly, my Creole sucks. I'm out of practice, and it could use some work. But does that make me any less Haitian than other people whose Creole is better? I don't think so. But what can I call on? What can I invoke? I can invoke the pride, the history that informs that pride, like, and how it moves me to like act as a creator. So I think like the things that are specific to you and your experience still have value without needing to represent the whole culture from whence you sprang, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hello, I know that you've worked on Genlock beforehand, and recently with Rooster Teeth shutting down, I was wondering if you were given the opportunity to relaunch the IP into a comic of your own or not.
I mean, that's beyond my hands, but like, I think that universe has so much rich storytelling potential. Like, I think there's a lot of like possibility about like what it means to share consciousness with people, and the mutability of the human body and non-human bodies, and like as a means of self-expression. I think there's a lot there, and these are all classic sci-fi tropes. But I think that universe is primed to let you explore them in a really interesting way. So yeah, thanks for that question.
Hi, I'm Jarrell. I'm a cinematic artist.
Nice. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, with the current state of gaming right now, how do you feel?
Why is there some shit going on? Go ahead.
Do you think, as a person of color, and also I gotta say thank you for paving the way for a brother like me to like maintain my position. But yeah, with things going on right now, how do you feel? Are we going to continue to get proper stories out of new up-and-coming indie studios based around us? Or is it still going to be such a predominantly white space that we won't be able to get heard properly?
The thing with video games and most other forms of mass entertainment like movies and TV is like who controls the funding, who controls the green light process, right? So I think, I think indie creators are going to be really important to these two art forms, or these multiple art forms, because if you scramble and get that money, if you have to self-fund, then you have a lot of the kind of institutional hurdles like knocked down for you, right? When I wrote The Natural back in 2012, 13, I don't remember. Like I talk about the black arts movements of like the 60s and 70s, like writers like Amiri Baraka and other people whose names are totally escaping me now. But like they formed their own publishing imprints. They created mechanisms that let them skirt around the people that will be gatekeeping their way out, right? So I think video games is really close to that. Again, you look at Strange Scaffold and the work that Xalavier is doing over there. Like he's doing it all on his own. He's just announced a new publishing deal with a partner that whose values match his. And I think that's going to be the thing, right? Like as these collectives of creators start forming, it's going to be about like approaching the business holistically, right? So yeah, sometimes that's going to be crowdfunding. Sometimes it's going to be like angel investors, like however you find the capital, and capital is the problem. But like the tools have become so democratized now that you can probably get in. I think the thing is like, because video games are so capitalistic and market driven, you may not get that second and third chance to hone your craft. And I think that's the thing that is really scary about where the industry is right now. But I think the indie space is where a lot of this storytelling, I think, evolution is going to happen in a big way. And again, I'm not any great sage saying that's true of most art forms, but video games especially. I feel like the big AAA spaces are so risk averse now that real storytelling innovation is probably going to happen elsewhere.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for a great talk.
Was it? Thank you.
Oh yeah, amazing. I'm gonna resist wanting to ask you about your thoughts on like Civil War and One More Day and all that stuff, but
Okay, I was like, he's talking about comics?
Yeah, comics. Yeah, not the upcoming movie, which is also interesting. There's something interesting. For a long time, you talk about people of color sort of inferring, oh, Spider-Man is black, or Spider-Man is representative of me in a subtle way.
Yeah.
If you read the signs, it's there. If you read the signs in X-Men, it's there. To what extent you can fold a lot of like representative or decolonial ideas into a story about, well, it's space invaders that are taking our resources. As these storytelling spaces get more diversified, you can kind of literally be like, oh, it's Killmonger. He's a European colonizer. Or Claw.
Yeah.
What is the utility, I guess, of kind of sneaking in, or to what extent can these themes still be snuck in? And is there a utility to that? Is there
Do you know about like subtext versus supertext?
Subtext or supertext as it pertains to these themes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, look, fiction allows you the ability to comment on society in ways that it may not necessarily be ready to hear, right? So, when you want to write creative work that deals with the inequities of the world, subtext is probably your safest angle to talk about that, right? You can be metaphorical, you can gesture at the real world, but when you're doing supertext or the main text, right? Like, you can actually invoke actual historical moments, right? Like, and not be like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's like, no, this thing that's happening here is just like what happened in the real world, right? So I think there's, utility to both approaches. But the other thing about subtext is, like, sometimes you just want to tell a ripping yarn. Sometimes you just want to tell that story where, like, the bad guy and the good guy trade punches for 24 pages, right? And then and any other, like, sociocultural concerns you can fold into subtext. So it depends on what your storytelling priorities are. Like, I think any storyteller has to find a balance if they want to speak about sociocultural issues, like. Because, like, nobody wants to, like, just have a whole plate of, like, Brussels sprouts. I mean, maybe you love Brussels sprouts out there, and more power to you. But, like, you want, like, a varied meal for your entertainment purposes. And, like, I think that's one of the things that you can still use subtext for, right? It's like, okay, some people are just showing up just to see, like, the vampire suck blood. But, oh, you know what? Vampires are, like, CEOs. Yeah. And then you're like, I never thought of it that way before. So there's one reader who, like, was just showing up for the blood sucking is now getting some anti-capitalist messaging, if that's when you want to fold into your work. So, yeah.
But I thought vampires were gay.
So first of all, it was a pleasant surprise to see, a game talk about, like, with so much passion about, like, comic books, and especially about, like, Dwayne McDuffie and Christopher Priest and everything like that. It was a pleasant surprise for me as someone who's a comic book nerd.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. You owe me. I don't know what I'm saying now. This is what happens.
Deep breaths. It's all good.
Yeah, just don't think about the live stream. This is more of a question. From the perspective of, I can go in for, like, game design more specifically. You talked about the dynamics between, like, level designers and game designers and narrative. I was wondering if there were, like, any more, like, I guess, other dynamics to take note of, or, like, some hurdles to go.
Yeah, like, look, this is all collective, collaborative creativity, right? So, like, now that I'm in a studio, like, I'm experiencing, like, hey, sometimes the ideas will come from another discipline. Like, level design wants to do this. Can we provide narrative support? Can we make this make sense narratively, right? Like, so it's not like just run and find the thing because that's what the game needs you to do. Like, can you make it have meaning, right? And the other times it'll be like, hey, no, we have a storytelling idea, a character beat, or an arc for an NPC that we want to manifest in the game. And then you guys in level design have to help us figure it out, right? So, like, sometimes it's like it'll be the chicken or the egg, if I can use a hackneyed cliche. But, like, it very much is like a give and take. And like, to the extent that we can say storytelling has evolved in video games, like, it clearly was an afterthought, in previous generations of game making, right? Like, okay, we got the mechanics, we know what the action and the moment-to-moment experience is, and somebody write a story for it, right? Like, and that gets tacked on at the end. Now, I think story is becoming more of a foregrounded consideration, so that different disciplines have to figure out, okay, what kind of story are we telling? Like, as opposed to we're telling a story, like, what's it about? Who's the center? What does that have to say about the world at large? Blah, blah, blah. So, like, level designers aren't always concerned about that. Not to paint all level designers with a broad brush, right? But, like, they're like, okay, does this flow work experientially, right? Like, moving through this environment or this experience, like, what is your takeaway? Does it feel engaging? And that's can be all they can be concerned about. Like, but if you're a narrative person, you're like, okay, what is the meaning of moving through all of this stuff, right? Like, this level, what do you get at the end of it? And I think that's where the cross-disciplinary work really happens, and it's really tricky.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to check out the interview with Dwayne McDuffie.
Thank you. I'm proud of it.
And shout out to Brass Lion, since the studio mentioned that Evan's working with.
Hi, so thank you for your talk first. And I was wondering what you think about opportunities for taking stories that are less diverse in origin and adapting them to become more diverse, as opposed to taking stories that have been diverse from the start or that are generated anew, already having diversity integrated. And so.
Look, I can speak about this from the perspective of comics, right? There's been a lot of hue and cry when Marvel made a black man, Sam Wilson, Captain America, who's this patriotic symbol, literally the Sentinel of Liberty, one of his nicknames, and they made Thor a woman and Miles Morales a Spider-Man. The thing about these mythos, right, is the term we always use in the comic book fandom, is like again, like I said before, if they don't change and evolve and grow and speak to the times, like, they will die, and to me, my personal theory is like, the more robust a mythology is, the more interpretations it can support. When I was growing up, the Adam West Batman show was in reruns, and you're like, oh man, that's corny. I like the grim Batman who's like brooding and always sad and depressed. Not this guy who's cracking jokes and running around with a bomb. As I got older, I was like, you know what? The fact that Adam West, he called his version of Batman the Bright Knight. The fact that they were able to carve out the space for that in that show means that, like, hey, your storytelling possibilities for Batman are now greatly expanded. You can have like somebody who's like avuncular and paternal and goofy and doesn't take himself so seriously, and you can tell a whole different set of stories with that kind of character who's still Batman, utility belt, Batcave, Batmobile, Alfred, the whole nine, but like he just operates in a different modality. So like, these things are like meant to evolve. Like, they probably weren't intentionally purposefully created as such in the 30s and 40s and whatever, but like the way we've inherited these legacy characters and universes, like, just, I think from a sheer market capitalist perspective, like, you've got to find new possibilities for these characters, right? And that includes racial differences, like lived experience differences, and however you want to categorize it. Like, if we're concerned with like heroism or human nature, then like that stuff comes out in all kinds of different ways. Like, heroism comes in different shapes and sizes. It's not just like Kal-El from Krypton. Like, it's Calvin Ellis from Earth 23. He gets to be Superman too.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I think we'll have to make this one the last question. Sorry for late arrivals.
Okay. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but with like movements like the Chicago Black Arts Movement and the Harlem Renaissance and things like that, there were like economic and like political factors that allowed the black artists to come from all these different walks of life and areas and come together and make their own diverse art that they wanted to tell. What is a kind of way that we could organically create those spaces nowadays without having maybe those factors for us?
Look, I mean, I think step one is just finding common cause, right? Like, if you're somebody who loves anime, it's like, but they're really not talking about us that much. Like, finding your cohort, right? Your community, like that has these same concerns or desires and hopes, right? It's not an economic imperative or like a political imperative, but it is like a creative imperative. And like, if you get anything from this long ass talk I've been giving, like, those things fold into each other, right? Like the creative, the sociocultural, the political, like, all can fold on one another. So you don't need to have like a cause or a protest, right? You can just be like, what would it be like if I made this kind of story? If a bunch of people gather together and make that kind of story. And I think, when you look at those movements of the past, like, Langston Hughes writes poetry about his circumstances because I think what comes first is the urge to create, the urge to speak his truth and put it out into the world, in the form of poetry and journalism, whatever. Like, again, it's like the need to shout that you exist. When in the 1960s, a protest sign that you would see in Black freedom movements all the time is like, I am a man, and that saying that kind of thing boldly and forthrightly was radical and revolutionary because, the history of the country it was predicated on the fact that black people weren't human, you know? So like saying that. So my point is like finding that same imperative creatively, like can probably help you find community. I hope that is a good answer for you.
It is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, let's have one more round of applause for Evan Narcisse. Thank you guys all so much for coming. We will, I think the next time we're back here is in 3 weeks after spring break. We're going to have a documentary screening of Break the Game about streaming and the streamer Narcissa Wright with a Q&A with the director of that film, Jane Wagner. So hopefully we'll see you here in a few weeks. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you guys for coming out.